You know the phrase, there's no accounting for taste, or one man's meat is another man's poison. I've always thought that sort of poses interesting questions for the journalist trying to review something. Let's say the film critic who doesn't like musicals. Does that mean that they shouldn't sit all the way through La La Land? Maybe there's a restaurant critic who had a bad experience with garlic early in life. Does that mean they now shouldn't taste a chicken Kiev? Well, no. You just have to be objective. Put your own tastes to one side, because others clearly do like these sorts of things. And with that, I give you the new Bentley Bentayga, here in flame orange paintwork. Not, I have to say, to my taste, but that doesn't mean I can't review it objectively, of course. Now this is a facelift, as I say, so we've got the bigger grille at the front. The lights have this cut glass effect here to fit in more with the Continental GT. Moving down the side, well, we've got enormous 22-inch wheels, which is why the 400mm brake discs look merely adequate. The rest of this car, well, it's got the black pack on it, so that is an extra £14,000 to you. This being a first edition, that's another £32,000, for which you get some really quite delightful little badges just up here. Can we also have a moment for the carbon fibre rear wing, which is, as I say, important, I think, I agree, in terms of lowering the centre of gravity on a car that weighs 2.5 tonnes. Around the back of the car, well, it's a bit like the Aston Martin DBX in terms of stamping a sports car identity onto the rear of an SUV with the new lights. Mechanically, as I say, not much has changed. 20mm wider on the rear axle and no W12 at launch anyway. So this is the petrol turbocharged V8. I think we better go for a drive. One thing before we go anywhere. Oh, look at this. Bentley Momentum. Not a fragrance, but hand sanitizer. That has to be the poshest hand sanitizer I've ever seen. Ah, the times we live in, eh?
So, with germ-free hands, we headed off into the countryside.
The bigger changes to the Bentayga have really taken place inside the car, and it's just a sort of a light refresh of the whole interior cabin. Things like this new 10.9-inch touchscreen in the middle, which is very nice, very reactive and looks lovely. We've also got the clock moved up here with the sort of the wing motif, which is rather Art Deco.
The other interior changes include things like the digital dash and a wireless charging cradle. Don't worry though, it's not all touchscreen tech fest. The deliciously tactile organ stop vent controls remain. Oh, and the first edition pack that I mentioned is the reason for all the orange stitching, and more importantly, the upgrade to the fabulous name stereo.
Nearly 1800 watts it's capable of pumping out. Impressive. Perhaps the biggest physical change to the interior of the Bentayga though is not actually something that you can feel from the driver's seat.
Your mobile device is still in the vehicle.
To get the full benefits, you have to be back here because, well, they've increased the room for rear passengers. So there's 100mm more knee room than there was in the old Bentayga. There's also this down here, this little screen, so you can fiddle with everything to your heart's content. Anyway, back to the driving. The actual driving experience is, well, it's quite impressive, certainly in a straight line. I can see why people like this, because there's an imperiousness to it. It's like a tank, really. No matter what the road surface is like, this just seems to sort of steamroller over it all. Whatever the road surface, there is a plushness to the air suspension. I do quite like that.
There is an almost unparalleled serenity to the big Bentley that is very befitting of the Flying Bee badge. A feeling of resolute calm, however turbulent the tarmac beneath the 22-inch wheels.
I do like the feeling that you get with this car in terms of its luxury through heft. You know when you pick up an item like a paper knife. Does anyone still use a paper knife? I don't know, but if you ever pick one up and they have this really incredibly weighty handle. They're sort of ornamental, but they have a luxury to them because of the sheer weight in your hand. This is the same.
It's this feeling of quality through weight that then makes it seem a little odd having lightweight looking carbon fibre trim on the inside. I think I'd stick with something from the range of wood veneers.
In terms of pace, do you miss having the W12? Not really. 542 brake horsepower, so that's 550 PS, and 568 pounds-foot of torque is ample. Certainly for 0 to 60 in 4.4 seconds, 0 to 100 9.9, which is every bit as fast as you need it to be.
When it was launched, the Bentayga was touted as the fastest SUV ever, capable of 187 miles an hour. It was then shorn of that title by the Lamborghini Urus before swiping it back with the speed version. This V8 one will do 180 miles an hour flat out, which is quite enough, unless your route to work is down a runway, which I suppose it might be if you're buying a Bentayga. Of more interest to most, I suspect, is its performance in the bends.
As you come up to corners, and it is a big car. Keep within its limits, and it's okay. But try and push any harder than that, even if you put it into sport, and there is just no disguising that weight, even with its 48 volt anti-roll system. This is not a car for the twisty stuff. And those steel brakes barely feel adequate sometimes.
Even though the V8 versions of Bentleys have always felt keener than the W12 variants when it comes to diving for an apex, nonetheless you will still need to manage the weight of the nose in this, giving it time to turn and not asking too much of the tyres. This is certainly not the sportiest of SUVs, and hustling it reveals a marked contrast to the Aston Martin DBX that I drove recently. But then some would argue that for most customers that's not the point of a luxury SUV. The point is to feel stately, secure, superior, and for some, to make a statement. And the Bentayga can be very successful at fulfilling all these desires. Desires that quite a lot of people clearly have, which is why this exists.
If people didn't buy this, then Bentley wouldn't build it. But people do buy it, in their droves really, at least relatively speaking. 20,000 Bentaygas have been produced so far, and 45% of Bentley sales in 2019 were made up by Bentayga, and that's, it was an old car by that point, hence the midlife facelift of this model.
So this new one will probably sell like hotcakes, and I can see why. No, this bright orange £197,000 behemoth might not be my cup of tea, but then apparently not everyone shares my love for sports cars without windscreens or hot hatches with bucket seats. Each, as they say, to their own. And it doesn't mean that I can't appreciate some of the things that this Bentayga does, some of the feelings that it elicits. It's a bit like that film critic that doesn't like musicals. Just because you don't like the idea of a story being told through song, doesn't mean you can't appreciate the quality of the singing.